Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 58. I'm Enigmius and today we're building a new hover vessel and it's kind of wound up in an awkward place for the time being. This is what happens when we place blocks on top of blocks that aren't connected. The physics engine has kind of a fit and bounces things around. This was actually on its side at one point and then I left the blocks that they were all sitting on in place. So the next time it did a bounce, it couldn't just go back flat, it had to do something else, so now it's on its butt. I decided for the time being, just very briefly, we would take a look at the underside of the hover vessel since it's so readily available to us, and then we're going to try and flip it over so that it sits the way that it's supposed to, and talk about the design as a whole. So one of the things that I'm learning is that blocks that sit flat on other blocks, or we're basically in contact with other blocks, say for example a base touching a ship with just regular blocks or blocks that are not landing gears, this is where we get into that situation of things bouncing around for no immediately apparent reason. And it could be also directly related to why sometimes hover vessels tend to get flung around when they're driving around. They get thrown way up in the air. It's because, again, blocks that are not landing gears coming in contact with voxels and the physics engine saying that's not supposed to happen. We're going to throw them away from each other. And that is kind of why I've set things up this way, the way that they are. These are the new hover engines. The hover engines used to look like these guys, but these guys are now hover boosters, which are necessary if you want your ship to be able to make those little jumps. The engines themselves are these guys. There's a smaller variant, but I chose to use the larger one. We've got 2 here, and then 2 on this other pod here, and then we've got 4 on the section way up there. I haven't had a chance to test any of these to see how they behave, but one of the things that I was concerned about again is what if these hover engines don't qualify as things that are allowed to touch other blocks that don't belong to the ship? If we leave them exposed and at the lowest point on the ship, then we could have problems with them being flung all over the place. So I set myself up so that our landing gears, which are these blocks, these flat sort of things here, are the lowest point on the ship. And I did that by, just putting a couple of blocks there and then putting the landing block. And you can see quite clearly there's nothing lower on the ship than the landing gear. I don't know if it's going to make that much of a difference, but if you were ever wondering why I would do something like this, there's actually a method to the madness, and we'll see how well it works out when we actually get the ship down and able to demonstrate what it's going to look like when it's right side up. So I'm going to try and do that now. I've got some fuel that we can throw into place, and we've got a cockpit in place, so we can try and see if we can't just use the RCS units to flop this guy down, because I had no thrusters for it yet. Alright, so after numerous attempts to get the thing to sit flat, it's basically made it very clear to me that it has no intention of doing so. So we're going to have to wait until it's a little bit closer to complete, especially when it comes to the addition of thrusters, if we're ever going to get this thing to sit the way it's supposed to. It's actually not that bad, because we do have our drone that we can use to kind of take a look at the thing as though it was sitting flat, and we can do that by just kind of going like this, and you can sort of start getting an idea of how it's supposed to look when it's sitting flat on the ground. This would be the front of the ship, and then this would be the back end of the ship. Very much under construction at this point. Neither the front nor the back, I would say, is complete in terms of design, but there were certain key features that I wanted to mess around with, specifically with the hover vessel, because I thought it was the kind of ship that we could really get away with it. One of those was using the wall blocks, or the wall variant of blocks, and the easiest way to do that is to go like this. And you can see there's these very narrow kind of pieces that we can use. They have about half the hit points of an equivalent sized cube, sort of sloped or full based block. And the whole idea is that you can do more detailing with the wall blocks in a way that looks kind of like it's got a little bit more finesse than you might expect from such an otherwise blocky sort of system. We've got a certain number of slopes that we can use with the fuller sized blocks, but with these guys we can get into a little more detail. So you can see here we've got sort of this vent thing going on, like almost like an air scoop, and you kind of wonder, based on how many of these I've got on the ship, what it needs all that air for. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. But I like the look of it. So that's one thing that I've been messing around with. And just kind of messing around with the colors and how to lay it out in a way that looks kind of convincing, like it was designed that way by someone who knew what they were doing, instead of me. So what we did was we just have the leading edge of these fin sort of things painted white, which is the exterior color of the rest of the ship. And then the interior pieces we painted black, so that it's got kind of this shadowy sort of look to it. And of course these pieces here are white, this flat section. Probably bring it out a little bit in the black department, just so that we get a little bit more consistency. Right now I think there's a little bit too much going on, reaching in the back there with the white, but we'll see. There's all kinds of opportunities to mess around with it. Done the same thing up here with these guys, and in the back there you can see all the way through to the concrete on the other side, but in the back is where we're going to have a bunch of thrusters, forward-facing thrusters. One of the things that I have to remember with the new hovers, in addition to the different hover engines, is that everything is based on your forward thrust in terms of how well you can climb hills and do things of that nature, because the ship is supposed to be tilting and following the terrain the way you might expect it to, instead of just trying to constantly sit level and move around that way. So we definitely want to make sure we have plenty of forward thrust. So we're going to have room for a number of thrusters on the top section here, and they'll kind of close off that section there, and then say we've got air intakes for those thrusters, which they totally don't need, but we'll pretend that they do. We've got the interior so far very much like any other ship we do, overkill in the RCS generator and fuel tank departments, to make sure that we never really have problems with not having enough power or not having enough ability to turn or things of that nature. And you can see I've only filled a few of these tanks because there was no point going around and filling all of them, but we've got a lot of tanks in there as well. So once it's fully fueled and ready to go, we should have enough capacity to hold fuel to keep the thing going for quite some time before we have to think about refilling it. And we will also have our various different storage containers, ammunition containers, cargo containers in here that are accessible. The entrance to the ship will be from the rear, like it is on the Adder, our current hover vessel. And this whole section here is going to be very well armored from this point onward, so that we don't have to worry much about the block, the control block right here, or the cockpit being destroyed by stray fire from the front. And then we've got this sort of spine thing here leading to this front section. Now this front section is going to get reworked in the upper sort of area around here. I'm not 100% satisfied that that's the way I want it to look. The lower section might get a bit of a rework as well, but we've got more vents on the front. And again, lots of opportunity to change colors and the way things are looking and angles and all that other stuff. But for now, it's fitting the look of the rest of the ship so far. So we're going to keep that in mind as we move forward, is that we've got this sort of aesthetic going on with these various different vents here and there. Probably quite possible to overdo it, but we're going to push the limits in terms of what I like and see where we wind up. Kind of looks like a Klingon battlecruiser in the making, if you're familiar with the Star Trek, the old school ships, where it's got the side pods and then it's got this long narrow section with the thing on the end. It's not going to look like that when it's done. This whole section in here, this gap between this front section and the rear section, is going to be filled in. It's going to be a lot more robust than it looks right now, so that it's going to definitely look like a ship that's meant to be not a Klingon battle cruiser. It's going to have some substance to it in this section in here. And then we'll have thrusters placed in various different locations where we need thrusters. We're going to have weapons on it. We're going to have turrets because it's a hover vessel, and that's one of the benefits of having a hover vessel, is we can have turrets. Primary weapon is going to be an artillery cannon, and it's going to be sitting on the top in the front section around here somewhere, so you can get an understanding of just how much we have to fill in. This back wall, if we want to call it a wall, is probably not even going to be there in the finished version. It's going to be part of the hull extending backwards. So that's a lot of design discussion for a hover vessel, but as you can see, it's coming together in a way that we haven't used before, which is these vent sort of things. And the hover vessel itself is going to be, most of the hull is going to be elevated above the ground based on these pods here in this front section where you can see the hover engines are, so that it looks like it's just making a little bit of contact on the ground as it's moving around, and then the rest of the ship will be elevated a ways above that. And then we're going to be doing some detailing on the back end as well, if we ever get it flipped over properly. Right now, it just does a strange little dance when we approach it. Tries to spin around, be a little bit coy, and damage the blocks that it's sitting on, so we have to be careful that they don't get so badly damaged it starts destroying itself. And then we'll go from there. So the next episode, it'll probably be mostly done. We might be looking at a little bit more design discussion, some performance discussion, where we located certain things and why, relative to the new hover mechanics. And eventually we're going to take it out for a bit of a spin. We're going to go to the points of interest that we visited previously. We're going to test out the new zoom on the turrets, specifically the artillery. And we're going to see what else we can do to the points of interest on Masperon before we move on to the next thing. So if you want to be notified when we add the next episode, as always, you can subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.